Endemic diseases exist within a population and geographical location for such an extended period of time that it is not uncommon for life to begin adapting to its presence. With a constant environmental stressor, seemingly that does not move, the body will begin to find ways to deal with it, as those who survive are the ones who will pass along that genetic information. Through potentially random mutations that arose before it was even a problem by sheer luck, the species will then fare better, or at least that particular version of the species will fare better than others who do not have this genetic mutation. This in turn will lead for that genetic trait to become the dominant one in the environment. This is an evolutionary arms race, as you can call it, and it's what drives the formation of new traits, and it changes over time. But how exactly does that make them successful? Well, one such example is almost perfectly explained by today's topic. In the events of blood quantum, what would start in the fish population would eventually go on to begin spreading to humans. Seemingly, after a person would expire, they would get up and begin attacking others, further spreading the issue. However, what was the most obvious aspect of this infection is that it did not spread to the Native American population. So the question is, why? So in today's episode, let's discuss the disease, where it likely came from, whether this is natural or artificial, and what is its pathophysiology, as well as why the native population appears to be immune. But as always, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoy this content, then let me know by liking it, because it really does help the video. Also, I'm posting over on Roanoke Tales and Roanoke Games. Those are going pretty strong. Check those out, as well as check out my Discord, where we watch movies every month that end up here, and check out merch at roanokemerch.com. All of those are in the description. We kick off our story with this being in the Great White North, a rare find, or at least it seems like it's in the Great White North. I looked up the actual Crow Indian reservation, and they said it was in Montana. But this is sponsored by Canada, so I'm not really sure. Anyways, a warning comes up talking about the native inhabitant's daughter running off with the sons of settlers, and then the sons of the settlers becoming like the Native Americans. As a man hauls in his catch, he is at the Red Crow Indian Reservation. It's 1981. Going to shore, he begins gutting the fish. As then he goes to finish one off, it begins moving, which is a bit odd. Usually they don't do that when gutted. Backing up, the rest start flopping around, indicating that too, they're just functional somehow. This disturbs him greatly, as it would with anyone, which, terrific sushi though. Nice and fresh. As we get the Blood Quantum title card, seeing an animation of industry in the background and a woman giving birth in nature that moves into the water, I think I figured out, because I've watched this movie several times, basically, man is in the background, obviously being man, building industry, going to the moon, all that good stuff, as Mother Nature is basically birthing something to counter man's expanding influence. At least that's how I interpret it. Flying along, we have a town on one side, and on the other side, the reservation. A single bridge connects the two sides, separating the townies, as they are known, from the natives in the area. The Red Crow police, or I guess it would really be just the Red Crow sheriff, drives along, heading to a man's cabin named Moon. Drinking on the front porch, they go and they check out the dog. The dog appears to be sick, but they really don't know what's wrong with him. Trailer then pops around at him to put him out of his misery, and then collects the quadruped's body to go bury it later. It appears to be Joss's dog, which is his ex. Moon then laughs about it and says that he wishes he could take out his ex's dog as well. Ah yes. What a cool and collected guy, not denoting anything under the surface at all that could be a problem. Moving over to Joss, actually, she is cutting some wood. Heading inside, she puts on some scrubs and drinks some tea. Trailer then shows up to talk to her. She's surprised by how early he is if he was just given the news. She assumes Doris had already called him and told him about it. Their son Joseph got picked up by the town's cops and won't be released to anybody else but Trailer. She then asks where her dog is, as he says he will keep an eye out for it, and then heads outside to call Doris. Who knows, your dog might be closer than you think. Very sad. Getting the lowdown, some drunk white guy is obviously trying to eat somebody's chickens for some reason, which standard for about 8 a.m. People being violent, and then Joseph and Lysol also got picked up together. She also tells Trailer that his dad called and he sounded scared, so he should probably head over there first and see what he wants. Heading to literally the most badass 60-year-old's house imaginable, you'll see what I mean later, he then heads inside as the old man has a cooler with a crate on it. He tells Trailer to open it, and opening it up, he says he just gutted those fish as they start jumping around, scaring the holy hell out of Trailer. Looking at it, he knows it's gutted, as his dad says he pulled it out of the water this morning and something is wrong with them. Very clearly, they decide to burn the fish, as in the trunk, something begins moving. The dog gets up to go to attack as he puts another round in it, putting it down for a second time. Trailer then deputizes his dad to see what's going on with this, as even in the fire, the fish are still moving. So first things first, I'm a realist. Second, from what we saw, the dog, and from what we can see with the fish, this clearly denotes that the original rules of life seemingly do not apply. The dog was taken out with not a headshot originally, but appears it was probably just a heart shot. The second time though, it was definitely a headshot. The fish, having been hauled up from the water, were taken out by being gutted, so their brains were still intact. It would appear that when the infected come back, the original organs are no longer the life support mechanisms that they once were. Every body, as in every single body on this rock that is considered complex multicellular life and an animal, is really just a concoction of life support systems trying to keep a nervous system protected and alive as its most basic task. The body without the nervous system is nothing. The nervous system without the body is a brain in some CEO's office, as they are planning on turning it into a mech to patrol futuristic dystopian streets of Detroit, Michigan, where the dad from that 70s show hunts. Interestingly enough, lifespan is dictated by the failing of the body, not the failing of the nervous system typically. Now, neurodegenerative issues can also cause it to be sort of the other way around, but only typically because the functions of the body have failed also. Anyhow, with an animal getting up and walking around after the body has already failed in its task of keeping it alive, as well as the nervous system still somehow being operational, then the paradigm of life has shifted so dramatically that this would have to go down to the core of the cell and change things. Our bodies, as well as every other animal on this planet's bodies, rely on oxygen to function. Due to oxygen's volatility, this energy can be used in our bodies in the Krebs cycle. We have two forms of metabolism, one much more sustainable than the other, aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration obviously uses air, which means oxygen, to fuel your muscle cells with ample ATP to support their function, but anaerobic occurring primarily in the muscle cells when the body cannot supply enough oxygen to meet energy demands. Typically, this is when you are working under strenuous conditions. The process, however, creates much less ATP and is not going to be as sustainable for as long. It also produces a ton of secondary problems, such as the buildup of lactic acid in the body. When we see any species come back, we have to ask, how exactly is this happening? And at its core, what has to shift in order for this to take place? Given the fact that the metabolism is no longer being fueled by the lungs in land-dwelling animals or the gills of fish, this is a critical fact of life that would indicate there needs to be some sort of shift over to running on an anaerobic metabolism. It is the only way for the cells to still function without the need to breathe, and this would involve the alteration of the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cells we all know, and completely change its functioning ability. But how might this be the case? Well, we'll get there soon. Over in a holding cell, we meet Lysol and and Joseph, a man, is also puking up his guts in the toilet. Lysol tells him to just die already, as they talk about if Trailer is coming to get them. Lysol says he's not a charity case, as the man then falls over, throwing up blood. They start banging on the door to get the cops' attention, as Trailer then shows up half an hour late to find Josh has been waiting on him. Knocking on the glass, he gets up to give them the paperwork, as Trailer then asks what he did. Apparently, Joseph was on the bridge, and he crawled out onto the top and literally took a dump on an old lady's car. My God, brutal. He then fell off the bridge and landed on her car. I mean, dude, you're lucky not to be in a casket. So the sheriff starts coughing as he starts laughing about that, as then they head over. Seeing the guy passed out, they then tell him what happened, as then he throws up even more blood. His eyes have hazed over as a fight breaks out. Joseph gets bit initially as the sheriff goes to get bit next, and then they kind of just jump this guy as the sheriff starts beating the holy crap out of him. The guy in the cell then wakes up, smacking the door as everyone but the sheriff runs away. Joseph then rides home with his mom, and then he just tells her that he vandalized a car, as she says he needs to make better choices, as then they get followed by what I think is a 65 Mustang. I'm not 100% sure. I'm beginning to think it's probably not. I'm not 100% sure what this car, you know what? I'm gonna look it up. Now, it really depends. This to me looks like it could have been a 1965 Mustang. However, it also could be a 1969 Pontiac Grand Prix. What is a Pontiac Grand Prix, you say? So this was Pontiac back in the day when Pontiac was actually awesome. So you either had a 400 cubic inch engine, which was a 6.6 liter V8 that produced 265 horsepower. Well, at least it was available, or up to 350 horsepower if you actually tuned the thing correctly. Or you could get the 428 7 liter V8. This engine was available with 370 horsepower all the way up to 390 horsepower. Although this was considered to be a high output. But the Grand Prix also came standard with 3-column shift manual transmission, but most of them were actually just equipped with GM's turbo hydromatic transmission. Floor mounted, basically all the good stuff, but these things actually look pretty sweet. I like them personally because they're just straight up shaped like bricks. The new Grand Prix, in fact, if you go over to Junkyard Digs channel, I was actually in the Grand Prix episode where we just raced crappy cars around his land. Man, I'll tell you what, they did cars dirty in the future. Like, have you seen Chevy Impalas, or Impalas as, you know, some people say, or Chevy Malibus? Like, those things were sweet back in the 60s. I mean, I've got a 67 Impala, or I call it Impala. Let's be real here, it's Impala. Anyway, somebody said Impala back in the day, and now everybody says Impala. I think it's called Impala. It doesn't really matter. The point is this. 67 Impala over everything else. It's a beautiful car. So initially, the vector for infection is said to be bad water, and then the infected fish are in there, obviously, who are just flopping around sans organs. So to me, this means the initial infection was not a bite or some super virus that was just in the air, but it was possibly something that man either ate or drank. Regardless of the vector, it appears at first the intestines are attacked, and this would cause the person to begin throwing up pieces of their stomach and intestines. What's also interesting is I believe it'll travel up the vagus nerve and eventually get to the brain, and this is basically its, I guess, pathway into the brain itself. So it does attack the nervous system, as we can see, because obviously people are going ballistic, but it also attacks the intestines. And if you didn't know, you also have like a secondary brain almost in your intestines to kind of help manage literally all of its functioning. So one of the things I've always found interesting is they're kind of finding that depression in some instances can be linked to your diet, because if the gut brain essentially gets depressed, then your real brain gets depressed. Turns out we're all connected to our bodies, right? So obviously, with pieces of your stomach and intestine being thrown up, this would clearly present other issues for a person who's experiencing this, as the stomach would be splitting apart. This would leak stomach acid into the abdominal space, which would cause further damage to any organs nearby, which is all of them. This would cause them to basically internally start bleeding, which you may think it's okay because that's what your blood is supposed to be. Actually, it's not. These are the hard-hitting facts you guys watch for. So as the organs begin to fail, you would enter something known as MODS, or multiple organ dysfunction syndrome. When this happens, it means 2 or more organs will begin to fail, which can then cause other organs to begin failing. As the dominoes all fall into place, this can lead to a rapid decompensation, as breathing can cease and then the heart eventually stops. Obviously, without these systems in place, this will lead to a rapid amount of brain damage to build up within about 6 minutes. From here, this is the point when the metabolic shift, I mean, it has to be obvious, right? And it's intrinsic to the whole change. A person in this state does not appear to be breathing anymore, and even if they are, the blood loss internally would be so great, they could not actively move the body without some sort of different metabolism. The only other possible option, and it's a big stretch, is that the intestines, while destroyed, had already maybe clotted off from the rest of the body and then died for all intents and purposes. And if like the circulatory system is still functional at this point, then it may keep them alive by utilizing oxygen because they are breathing. However, this still wouldn't make sense, as they still eat other people, and clearly they are not getting nutrition distributed if their intestines are no longer functional. So even exploring that route of thinking, it really doesn't make a lot of sense. So it must be that cellular metabolism has changed to anaerobic at this point. So talking about how Traylor abandoned his family, Lysol then goes to talk to Traylor, and Traylor gets a call to go to one guy's house, Shooker, who appears to be having a right proper domestic with the missus. Traylor says he can't keep bailing Alan out, or Lysol. This guy chose to call himself Lysol. He then calls him a sperm donor, so Lysol is Traylor's son. I'll tell you what, if I called myself Lysol, my dad would make fun of me probably forever. Nobody knows really what happened to him when he turned into a huge tool. Like, he went to foster care and then he came out as Lysol. That's his backstory. So Joseph now heads to his mom's work to go get his wounds treated. As he meets his girlfriend there, he asks if she's embarrassed him. She dodges that question at first and then finally says that she's not. Her father is embarrassing. Ah yes, getting knocked up young. It does happen. Wear a rain jacket, that would be my advice. So as Joss then looks for a tetanus shot, apparently they were cleaned out from the emergency room. A lot of people are biting a lot of other people. Well, that would probably raise a few concerning points, right? Like, you guys should probably look into that. Hearing a scuffle, one guy then bolts as another guy gets attacked further down the hallway, which nobody seems to really pay attention to at first, and the nurse or the doctor or whoever this guy is that is running out says nothing to anybody about anything. Man, no wonder this outbreak got such a good foothold out of nowhere. Like, nobody's talking to each other. So that evening, Traylor heads out to Sugar's property that he got a call about a while ago. The man that talks about how he had no time. She was supposed to get yellow teeth and grow their fingernails out. Well, this guy's absolutely lost it. He then says the baby needed to eat and she's just up there. Seeing her holding the offspring, that doesn't look good. Turning around, she then attacks Traylor as she bites him. He kicks her off of him and then runs outside to get the first aid kit as she grabs her husband and then starts biting him. Pulling the pellet dispenser on her, he ends the issue pretty much right there as he grabs Shooker and then takes off freaked out, which is pretty understandable. Having him in the back, Shooker is hurt and he tells Doris that he thinks his girlfriend is gone. He ended up taking her out. Joss then called trying to warn Traylor, saying not to get bit. On the bridge, they see an ambulance crash as he drives over there to check it out. Finding the driver completely donezo, Joss then gets out and grabs the force multiplier as she domes the ambulance driver before he turns. Joseph is stuck inside as Traylor then gets the door open as the woman is growling. One man approaches with a chainsaw and takes her out by going straight for the corpus callosum, which is fairly brutal. So with that problem solved, they then burn the infected on the bridge as Grandpa mentions the dead. It is now 6 months later and everything across the bridge is totally screwed. The whole town was infected while on the reservation side they have fortified and kept out the infected. At the Connex structure, Lysol sprays one of the infected as he looks at him. Being on guard duty, he then shows another woman that he's with some sort of cherry flavored powder. Doris then calls out saying that people are coming in. Seeing a man carry a woman, they tell him to put her down as she is sick. He says that he hasn't done anything wrong and he's just there because he was told they could help. They then spot the bite as Lysol hits the guy in the face, which they are angry as they have brought an infected upon their doorstep. They then smack the guy as a fight breaks out as Traylor then shows up, telling him to chill out and get it together. He says they are not supposed to be helping others, they are supposed to be surviving. So they talk about the infected girl as Broham then starts yelling speak English and he points out Traylor's bite, saying that they can cure her because they cured themselves, as then the girl stops breathing. Traylor then grabs him, telling him to go inside as he doesn't want to see this. They get the welcome party to bring him in, and like I get it, it's rough out here, but like maybe this woman isn't like the best person to have introduce newcomers. Like she sort of sucks. They then take out the infected girl as Broham ain't doing great on the way in. He says her name was Kira because the other woman called her Karen, as again this gal sucks at, bringing people into the fold, and then she burns the blanket that he was holding as then he heads inside to meet Joss to get looked at. Another woman is already in there as she asks if she's eaten anyone or if she's been bitten, and she says no. And what sort of intake process is this? There's I can go ahead and count like 6 things wrong with this. Like, I'm not saying you need to strip people down or anything, but the standard precaution is to assume everyone is infected with everything and also that they are hiding it. You need to identify if someone is lying and they actually have been bitten. Instead though, they don't do any of this, which is weird given that Joss is actually medically trained. So this gal is allowed to wander as then she heads to the bathroom as she starts looking at her bite. As she does this though, she sees blood begin seeping underneath the stall door. Because of the new welcome wagon crew of delight, the dude took himself out as he turns. Looking at a map, Traylor is showing where everyone kind of needs to start heading off the infected so that they can stop having people show up, as they set up a giant wood chipper on the bridge as the infected just walk straight into it. The problem is those who are infected who haven't turned yet just walk around it. So they're getting in and they're still infected, which presents a problem. So the plan is to get people out before they get infected and then when they turn, ending up on the reservation. He says they need to tell people to not drink the water or eat the salmon, but deer and moose are safe to eat. Realizing the guy turned though, Traylor then goes and takes care of that. So we can pretty much surmise at this point that this infection is spread through saliva contact in those who were infected, but it's also spread by the environment. From this, we need to understand what could even cause this in the first place, as it may help to explain the Native American immunity, but also what needs to change in the cells, which is the metabolism, which means the mitochondria needs to be affected. When a person consumes either infected fish or drinks contaminated water or is bitten, this would be the most clear example of a virus being transmitted, and this is for several reasons. First, with fish, dogs, and humans, from what we have seen, they're able to contract the illness, and this would mean it's likely not a bacterial thing, as others who do not contract it apart from Native Americans, which would be like, the deer and moose, seemingly can drink the water with no issue, meaning that if it was toxic, like a bacterial infection, this would degrade the intestines, or possibly it could just be some sort of toxin released further upstream by, industry or whatever. Then it should affect all animals equally, but it does not. The virus needs to have a specific receptor on a cell that it is looking for to enter the cell to begin its replication. So jumping this many species, however, is no small feat. I'm just gonna go ahead and tell you that. While we definitely do see this in nature, it is a bit strange. It would infect so many specific animals, but not every animal at this point. And this would seem to indicate that potentially something concerning the immune system may operate differently, causing the body to not react in a way that is detrimental until it can actually get the virus under control, which we'll explore that in a little bit when we talk about immunity. But since we're calling this a virus, how it is able to change from aerobic to anaerobic is some sort of genetic coding within it needs to actually affect the mitochondria and literally change its functioning to be more efficient when it's processing in an anaerobic capacity. That is the only way that it should be able to do this. And obviously, you're not really going to create that much ATP from an anaerobic cycle as opposed to aerobic cycle. So, based on that, this would mean that the neurons in the brain would also still die because it may not be getting enough energy output, I guess is the best way to put it. So the virus infects the cells, injects its genetic coding. It would have to be sort of like a DNA virus, I believe. I think it affects specifically the mitochondria though. So back over at Charlie and Joseph, they talk about how his parents and how Alan left for foster care. And like I said, he came back as Lysol and he has no idea what happened to him. Dude could have chosen literally any other name. Joseph then says, this is the last place that probably isn't overrun, but Charlie talks about how people look at her like she's weird, basically. Well, you can be infected and they can't, so it kind of makes sense. I'd probably look at you like you're weird too. She wonders if the offspring that she is carrying is infected and it might just eat its way out of her. She then feels like something bad is going to happen, but she doesn't know what. He then tells her that he loves her, but she doesn't say it back. Instead, she just sort of kisses him. I don't know, bro. I look at her like, no, say it back. Otherwise, you're going outside. Anyways, Trailer arrives to get Joss to pash up his fresh new bite. Taking his shirt off, bro has been bit a lot. They're out of lidocaine, so she has to do this like completely natural. Ouchies. They then watch Charlie and Joseph in what appears to be an intimate moment, which is a bit strange, as then she finishes up patching the wound. That night, everyone starts getting locked and loaded Brides of Christ as Lysol has a huge attitude about it and how the people here outnumber everyone else, and he thinks this entire camp is going to get infected. Grandpa then tells them, you don't have to reload a sword, it'll be fine. Lysol says there's a party at his place as he angrily invites Joseph, as Trailer says to follow him and don't let it get out of control. The other three men then head out to go into town to start clearing areas, remarking, they have their recreation, we have ours. That night, Charlie then wakes up without Joseph. As he's over at Lysol's, general debauchery is taking place, party at the end of the world sort of scenario. Moon then hands him the last of some sort of stuff as he says that they are square now, as Lysol then apologizes for being a total douche to Joseph and Charlie. He then crushes at the powder substance, talking about how there's a girl here named Lilith that he met up with before. Apparently she was angry at her boyfriend and wanted to hook up with anyone, so Lysol was it. He gets a call mid-activities and then goes down to the police station, I think to bust somebody out. Well, not bust somebody out. Basically, bail somebody out. And then they see that there's a bunch of blood on his face. So they arrest him because they thought he was fighting, only the blood wasn't from fighting. He says this time though, he's going to get back at her for that because I guess that's her fault or something. He then puts the powder in the beer and I'm assuming this is what he gives her. Granted, he also put the powder in his mouth. I think I know what the powder is, but he's kind of rubbing it on his gums like it's something else. I mean, it could just be the same thing and it gets her amped up. I don't really know. Remains to be seen. So later on at the party, Moon then talks about how the Earth is an angry old animal and that's why the dead keep coming back because the planet is sick of humanity. Lysol, meanwhile, is having a really bad time as Lilith turns during the events as Joseph runs in there and he says, don't let her finish me because she ripped off his, well, basically what's sacred to a man. And then she eats it. This was the final straw for Alan to go full Lysol. What a statement. So in town, they count roughly 10 to 15 people in the building that they're currently clearing. Working like a well-oiled machine, they trip and dome the first infected near the door. Bumper then heads in next with the chainsaw to do the Lord's work as Grandpa went around back. Finding a few more already taken care of, Trailer then heads into a larger area as one is cut in half and then he domes that one. Bumper up there took care of about 4 of them, so that means they're still missing a solid chunk of people. Hearing a clattering noise, then enter the next part of the building, finding a generator that is operational. Double doors then burst open as Grandpa has got a huge pile of them already donezo, which is nicely done. Returning from Lysol's crotch-eating extravaganza party, Joseph then tells Lysol that he needs to calm down, he's still got family, and they can get Joss to patch him up, but he's never going to be the same anyways. So at this point, Lysol just straight stabs him in the butt cheek, I think, or possibly lower back, as he says he has no family. He has officially gone full Lysol, which you never go full Lysol. Moon then gets out as they grab Lilith and bring her into the camp. Somehow, nobody notices that they open the door carrying this person until they release her on everyone there, as Joseph tells everyone to run. Bro, look, into the world where there's infected everywhere, my handheld is staying strapped to my literal body. Like, stay strapped or get clapped. No way that thing's like, I'm sleeping with it. So back in the sleeping quarters, Joss talks to Charlie about how this is the only safe place, as then they basically hear the infected overrunning the camp. Joseph comes in telling everyone Lysol has infected everyone. One guy then goes to leave because he panics as he gets torn apart on the other side of the door. Nicely done, dude. As Charlie then asks if they can panic now because her water just broke. Returning to home base, Traylor and his guys are told the infected are all in there. Joss then tells him not everyone can move, so they need to come up with a plan. Using Bumper, he gets in the car to lure everyone away. Starting up the country music. Can't say I do that myself, probably be a little more, I don't know, carry on my wayward son. And then open the door as they begin following the car. Leading the courtyard zombies away, Grandpa then heads in to start stacking bodies as there are more inside. They get the truck to transport people, and then they don't want to use any of the handhelds unless absolutely necessary because they will alert everything in there that they are there. Grandpa gets the first body as then they head to the sleeping area, finding more infected. Grandpa takes him out as he's working his way towards the other door where they get it closed. Joss then yells at Traylor, tending to Joseph as he tells everyone to get to the truck if they want to live. Locking the door with a knife, it then breaks open as they're forced to use the handhelds and take who they can as two people then fall out of the truck and get got. Running, they block themselves in a hallway as the door isn't going to hold though. Traylor then stays behind holding it as Joseph, Charlie, and Joss make a run for the door as it then bursts open, that's the male fantasy. So Traylor then gets torn apart. Not the male fantasy. Man, Lysol really blows. So getting out of there, they keep driving down the road as Doris is now being held in the church by Lysol and Moon. She gets on the radio and tells them it's basically a trap. They want to lure him in. They release an infected on Doris as the grandpa says he's coming for her. The next morning, they stop at the church to get everyone they can saved. Charlie is starting to have serious labor pains as Moon sits in there drinking. They have a group of people there who are basically knelt as they're going to use them as bait to draw in as many infected as possible, and then they're going to burn it down. He talks about how Lysol is such a great man and oh, he's so cool, but as he's gloating, he then takes a katana to the side of the head, which is absolutely brutal. Grandpa then asks the other woman where the coward is, and I'm assuming they take her out too because she is never seen again. As Bumper outside is kind of watching over Charlie and Joss, he gets a blade through the sternum. Joss then pulls a handheld on old Kendall over here, smooth as an egg, as then he grabs Charlie to take her out. Joss then starts talking to Lysol about how these are real people as she opens up on Kenny Boy, hitting him as an infected then bites Charlie. Joseph is able to take out the infected, but it's a bit too late. As the infected then walk over to the grounds, they drag Lysol to the area where he says if they would just stop and think about it for a second, they'll thank him. They don't really care. Grandpa then hands Joseph a knife to get rid of Lysol. Joseph puts the knife into Lysol's side, I guess, or maybe like into his ribs. I can't really tell where that thing went as they walk away, letting him bleed out. Grandpa then fires a shot to get the attention of the infected as Lysol waits to be devoured. And devoured he is from the crotch up. Ouchies. Well, you are a cow. Like I said, Grandpa is brutal. Also, my voice cracked. That sounded terrible. So the question now that we have basically seen what happened to the outposts and what they had constructed, and then the subsequent issues concerning Lysol being a total idiot, we need to talk about potentially this immunity and how it sprung up in the first place. So strap in. One of the issues we need to address is how is it possible that Native Americans alone would be immune and every other ethnicity in the area is totally screwed? Although technically speaking, it appears that only Caucasians were able to be infected, as I don't really see any other ethnicities having been turned by the infection. Taking it back, way back, you need to understand how location can impact a species in quite a dramatic fashion. A long time ago, according to the theory of evolution, the lineage of humanity had an ancestor known as Homo erectus. Homo erectus likely emerged from Africa around 1.8 to 1.9 million years ago, and as they moved north, the environment would rapidly change to go from more parasitic infections such as with malaria to more mRNA viral infections, which, not great. This was absolutely devastating for the Homo erectus population, and what is considered to be a mass dying of the species. Some would continue to survive due to likely a random genetic mutation that would save them. The response of their immune system to the infection was thought to have likely been an overreaction to the infection, inducing life-ending symptoms. This strong of a response may seem counterintuitive, and you may be inclined to believe that it would be a good thing, but you have to remember the immune system alone has the ability to just absolutely wreck your meat suit due to inflammation and damage to the cells that it can inspire through its desire to protect your body from foreign pathogens. Basically, you walk a tightrope every time you're sick. Too much of a response, you die. Too little of a response, you die. You need just the right response. So, as erectus live in the area, Those that were adapted to viral infections, which allowed for them to continue living there, would be the ones that would reproduce. Recently, I heard someone say that the out of Africa theory was incorrect because of a jawbone found in a cave in Greece that was actually older than what the out of Africa time frame, I think, suggests that we were here. But this jawbone is clearly sapiens. I think it's important to remember that these time frames that are given are really just a range, and they change a lot if there's new information which pieces together our history. It should be noted that plenty of humans are explorers, and there's really no reason to think that everyone all at once just decided, yep, time to leave Africa. I imagine like there was probably a large group that did, which was a major push, but I could really just see over like a long period of time, people just kind of walking north. I mean, could definitely happen, but that's just speculation on my part. Who's to really say? Anyhow, Erectus would change over time into Neanderthalensis, which eventually Sapiens would show up and then outcompete and outbreed by basically breeding with them, creating a mixture of the two. Like for instance, according to my genetic profile, I have 60% more DNA than average from Neanderthal. Lift heavy rock, inside voice quiet. So that does not mean my DNA is 60% Neanderthal. I had one guy absolutely get lost in the sauce in my comments one time, and I'm forever haunted by it. He had like a meltdown saying, you can't have 60% human DNA. You're not even a biologist. Or not human, but Neanderthal DNA. It's like, dog, I didn't say I had 60. Good, sweet Mary Mother of God. Anyways, the point is, so with some interbreeding with Neanderthal as they broke left, some would also break right and then head towards Asia. Around this time, a land bridge existed from Siberia to Alaska, which allowed people to walk across between 13,000 to 30,000 years ago. This land bridge would disappear around 12,000 years ago with sea levels rising. This completely isolated the people that got across there for an extended period of time, unless somebody wanted to take a canoe across the Bering Strait, which no thanks. As then these people there moved deeper into South America and continued to live in North America. This likely had very similar events happen as when Erectus first moved into Europe and Asia. Geography can have a massive impact on immune function and what you are immune to. In fact, blood types arose largely to contend with what was in the environment concerning pathogens. Blood groups can play a direct role in infection by serving as either receptors or co-receptors for microorganisms. Some make you more resistant. In addition, many blood groups have antigens that facilitate intracellular uptake, signal transduction, or adhesion through the organization of membrane microdomains. And some of this doesn't even have to be pathogen related. It could just be like, if you have this blood type, you're more prone to cancer. If you have this blood type, you're more prone to heart disease. Type O, if I remember correctly, helps actually people deal with many types of viral illnesses, but obviously it's not perfect. So due to their isolation in the area, Native Americans who survived the environment likely would have been largely changed. Some of this being advantageous, while others being extremely disadvantageous. The disadvantage would likely be the virgin soil issue, as it's known. When Europeans arrived, they brought with them diseases that Native Americans had been completely isolated from, meaning they had absolutely no immunity to it. And these were the really bad ones, like smallpox. Like that crap, I'm glad we've eradicated it, but I mean, even if you were in Europe, smallpox could still take you out. It's a crappy disease, you don't ever want to catch it. But this meant that large swaths of people met their end due to these diseases. The advantages likely came from dealing with certain illnesses that were already in the environment. It is known that when Europeans first got here, a lot of diseases that they caught were foreign to them as well, because they were in a completely new place. The Native Americans in the area seemed to fare much better, and this is due to their own immune systems having memory of these diseases because they've already been exposed to it, and along with that innate immunity that they possess, already were primed to deal with the issues. The innate immunity of mankind is the first line of defense when running into any disease. It is basically to help you buy time for your adaptive immune system to respond to the issue or to deal with like smaller problems like cuts or mold spores or anything like super localized. Macrophages will find bacteria, viruses, and parasites wherever they are or whatever they may be and then engulf them and destroy them. If the problem is bad enough, some pieces of the invader are then brought back from the battlefield, so to speak, by dendritic cells, who then present those pieces to B cells. These B cells will actually try to read it, and if they match, they will then produce an antibody after an explosion of cellular mitosis for that B cell, because they need to produce a lot of antibodies, which will then help to destroy the pathogen by immobilizing it, allowing for your immune system to attack it properly by latching on and destroying it. This part is how the adaptive immune system forms a targeted response that takes a few days, while the innate immune system responds in a more generalized manner. Now, how this relates to blood quantum, I believe, is that the Native Americans have something about their innate immune system that gives them time to form a targeted response, or they may already have an immunity to the disease due to coming into contact with it prior due to a genetic mutation. While immunological memory does not exist concerning from generation to generation, something in the environment the Native Americans are exposed to may have actually essentially been stopped earlier on by them having a genetic shift, and this causes their immunity. It's sort of like it's my conspiracy theory on the brain-eating amoebas, right? I know everybody watched the Kurzgesagt episode on Naegleria fowleri, and the thing is that there's a lot of, I guess, crossover with this channel. They were talking about how if you're exposed to it, antibodies don't do anything to it. It's like, well, neutrophils don't, but it's kind of interesting that people would have antibodies. I think it really just depends on, where it gets in the brain. And honestly, we don't know enough definitively about Naegleria fowleri to just kind of put it in that box like, oh, your antibodies don't do anything to it. I mean, at least in my opinion. So people who get exposed come in all shapes and forms, but it seems from my layman's perspective that those not from the area, at least based on the things that I've read where people were from who were infected, it seems like they came from somewhere else and then they swam in the water and then they contracted the amoebas more often. And this is due to the fact that the amoebas are in the water, they're in your, the soils, they're everywhere. These amoebas, okay, so if you ever use a sinus rinse, this is just a PSA for you guys. Do not ever use tap water, do not ever use spring water. You need to use distilled water because our methods of cleaning tap water do not kill Naegleria fowleri, and you need to be careful because you absolutely can expose yourself. Now, what's interesting is a lot of people still use tap water. It is in our water. That's just a given, right? It's everywhere. If you've ever dug in the dirt and then picked your nose, congratulations. You probably exposed yourself to it. So when you drink this water or pick your nose with soil in it, your body becomes aware of it and then produces antibodies in low amount. So it kind of seems like to me when it gets up your nose and then tries to go for the brain, it gets head off early on and then immobilized by antibodies, allowing the neutrophils a chance to destroy them. If you had no antibodies to it, it's possible that the neutrophils just can't catch it in time. At least that's what I think is a possibility. Again, I'm not working with Naegleria fowleri. I'm just sort of deductive reasoning here, I guess is the best way to put it. Obviously, there is going to be somebody who studied parasitology out there who's going to be like, no, you're an idiot. And if that's the case, hey, I'm an idiot. But that's just what it seems like to me. So in those not exposed to the amoebas who are running into it for the first time, their body never gets a chance to develop the antibodies in time before it reaches a critical point and the damage is too great for them to come back, not to mention it's already in the brain. And I think it works similarly to this movie. The Native Americans in the area, whether through hunting or by other means or possibly a genetic profile, may have been more exposed already to this hypothetical virus. Either that or a virus that is similar that the townies, as they are called, are just generally not exposed to. And this allowed for them to develop antibodies to this other virus that then prevented the zombie virus essentially from infecting them properly, as the antibodies were already there to help mitigate it. This is fundamentally how vaccines work. In fact, cowpox, for instance, is a less severe form of the virus that is smallpox, or is related to it, essentially. Yet getting cowpox would protect you from the smallpox infections, so it was advised to expose yourself to cowpox for that purpose. I believe it works the same as this infection. Now the question is, why are they only exposed, right? That doesn't make a lot of sense. Surely some townies would be eating the fish or drinking the water. This to me comes back to blood type and progression of this disease. Either this virus just mutated and recently it's become more aggressive, or more likely, it has come down to a genetic mutation that has been passed down in the Native American bloodline that gives their bodies enough time to form an adaptive response. We see this in Central Europeans who actually had the Delta 32 allele mutation that allowed for them to survive Yersinia pestis, or the plague as it's known. Interestingly, the second hand thing of this is it makes Central Europeans with this mutation more resistant to HIV infections, and in some they're outright immune because the receptor that HIV attaches to forms under the cellular membrane. To me, it appears that this must be a genetic mutation in the past that now allows them to be immune from possibly even a new virus that screws everybody else up, but not them. And it has to be this based on what we're going to see here in a moment. All Native Americans are immune, indicating a genetic build that makes their bodies just not susceptible to this virus. Then, when exposed to the virus, this genetic build allows them to exist long enough to deal with possibly if they were even infected in the first place and get a handle on it. So dragging Bumper back to the boat, they then find it's on fire. Not ideal. The whole plan was to wait until winter just kind of went away, and then they were just going to take the boats out of there. Another boat then arrives to get the rest of them as the team shows up. The infected are all running up as then they start to get everyone on. Grandpa says he wants to stay as he's not leaving the land again, as he tells Joseph to not look back. Turning around, mission objective survive appears overhead as he just starts straight stacking bodies. Joseph and the rest of the group then head out into the mist. As they get out there, eventually, it looks like Grandpa is overwhelmed, but I don't think he was, because as they're boating through the mist, according to the animation, he survives, and we know he can't be infected, so I think he's good. So Charlie, meanwhile, is giving full-on birth at this point, and eventually the offspring is born, and she doesn't want to hold it because she's afraid she's going to succumb to the bite at any moment. Joseph then brings up the question and says, well, if the baby's immune, maybe you're immune as well. She then requests the handheld and be taken out. He hands her the youngling instead as she gets a few minutes of connection. Then she's like, yeah, I'm literally about to change. I can feel it. So Joseph is then forced to take her out. Man, your dad, Lysol, your girlfriend, I think your grandpa's still alive. Just all the same 24 hours. That's absolutely brutal. So floating along, he then hangs out with her for a while and thus concludes Blood Quantum. Man, that was depressing. So this is the most clear example of genetic intervention allowing for survival. Due to the environment, much like with Homo erectus, who had a genetic mutation allowing them to deal with new infections, and Central Europeans' genetic mutations allowing them to survive the plague, this genetic mutation was passed down to the newborn offspring that allowed them to survive even though the mother was infected. Given that the newborn had no prior exposure to the environment, nothing could have been eaten or drank that wouldn't infect the mother, that wouldn't have infected the offspring. So if the mother was clean, the offspring should have been clean. That means they could not have developed a resistance, which means fundamentally the cell itself must have some sort of receptor that does not allow for the virus to infect them. And because of this mutation, this would have rendered the Native Americans immune to the plague, and then that just kind of seemed to take out everyone else. The question is, how do you contain it at this point? Well, the good news is, some of humanity is completely immune to it, so that is an ideal situation. The bad news is that this appears to be rather fast acting, like within a day. So unless you are taking viral suppressants, which may help, possibly, there's not really much you can do. I think the biggest thing you could probably, like, take valacyclovir or acyclovir, or basically Valtrex, right? It's a reverse transcriptase inhibitor, which means it stops your reverse transcriptase from actually carrying out the production and build of new viruses and all that good stuff. That might help in slowing the virus down, possibly giving you a chance, but even then, we don't really know if this becomes a genetic thing, and it may become a genetic virus based on the fact that it has to influence the actual mitochondria and the DNA that it has to change its functioning. So even if you were on viral suppressants, I don't believe your body would really be able to long-term deal with that unless you were on some real heavy stuff, like stuff basically for HIV. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, leave a like would be great of you, and subscribe is a great way to stay up to date when I post. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, Roanoke Tales, and Roanoke Games links in the description. But speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, I'd like to thank our astronaut, Tristan Kessick. Thank you, my man. Next, I'd like to thank our astrophysicist, Death Dancer, and Feather. Thank you guys as well. And to my scientists, Eris Dakota23, Invictus Echo, Metric System, Official Texan, and Vyrix Hellstrom. I do appreciate y'all support as well. And the rest of my patron, you guys are absolute ballers. Keeps everything running smoothly around here and is greatly appreciated. But all right, that's gonna do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I will see y'all in the next one.